do something you're very passionate about, and don't try to chase what is kind of the hot passion of the day.
So just go and do it, try, learn from it. You'll fail at some things. That's a learning experience that you need so that you can take that on to the next experience. And don't let people who you may respect and who you believe know what they're talking about, don't let them tell you it can't be done. Because often they will tell you it can't be done, and it's just because they don't have the courage to try it.
I think people that look for great ideas to make money, aren't nearly as successful as those who say, okay, what do I really love to do? What am I excited about? What do I know something about? What's kind of interesting and compelling?
The passion that one might bring with it brings so much more energy to that you're more likely to succeed.
You have to have an emotional investment in what you're doing. If you don't love what you're doing, failure is pretty much guaranteed. Success is not guaranteed by any means.
If you know exactly what you want to be, you need to spend as much time with people that are actually that already.
Given everything we have today, is there a way we can make this better?
From the moment I open my eyes and writing down every single thing I do, and then asking myself, is there something here?
If you believe in a Macintosh, if you believe in iPhone, iPod, iPad, if you believe enough, then you will see it. Because other people will believe in it. Other people will create software. Other people will create products. So you need to foster the belief in what you are dreaming so that it becomes a reality.
For somebody aspiring to, take things to the next level or to even surpass their wildest dreams, there's always going to have to be an element of luck, but I think more important is putting yourself in a business that can be ubiquitous, that really doesn't have limits. Because otherwise, there's always going to be a grind to it. But if the business, if it can't be something that you can visualize every business using or every consumer using, it's going to be tough to scale.
So don't think about, what is the quickest way to success? Think about what is the best way to building something.
When you have an idea, a classic entrepreneurial impulse is to hold the idea close to you and not go tell people because, the idea is so special.
Right.
That's almost always a mistake. Go talk to
Why is that a mistake? Yeah.
It's a mistake because your actual real competitive advantage is not that you have this idea that you have locked away in your closet, which may or may not be accurate and you have no idea which it is.
You have to be the best, but you have to be dangerous, right? You have to learn just enough to be dangerous, to build an idea, concept it, and show it to the world. And then it turns out there are lots of other people, including all 170 employees that work at Instagram, who are much better at doing all that stuff than I am. But you need to find people who can, be drawn to the idea that you build, and then they end up taking it and making it even better.
One way, and oftentimes the best methodology is to start with the perfect experience with just one person, get that right, and then figure out how to scale something great. Instead of scaling something not so great and then trying to improve it, that's really hard to do.
And so I think when you are starting a new business, you don't want to go after giant markets. You want to go after small markets, and you want to take over those markets.
An online community, then you're at a disadvantage to those who are. You can be asking online communities what they think about your ideas, or if they have any advice with what you're working on. Not only will you hear from people who are passionate about the subject, but you'll be hearing from people all around the world, each with their own experiences and stories that can help.
Most startups that fail do it ultimately because they did not make something that people wanted. They made something that, that they thought people would want, but they were either in denial about it, whether it was actually any good.
It's not just about doing focus groups. It's not just about double checking your vision. It really is about integrating this concept of testing our ideas rigorously throughout the product development process, throughout the marketing process, even as we scale up.
But what you really need to do is think about what is the smallest possible test that I can run for this idea, for this concept, for this theory, get it out there, and get customers using it. Because your customers are going to be the ones to tell you if it's really working or not.
This is our big advantage as a startup, is that we can actually get away with doing this. We can make this the core part of why we're doing business.
I think you should be spending your money on teaching and sharing, And so that might mean hiring a writer or two, perhaps, instead of a marketing person. And start writing and start getting people to listen to what you're saying. You can't talk about yourself.
Another quality that I think is important is kind of being flexible-minded or open-minded. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a vision for your idea or your product, but you need to be open to change it.
You need to define all of the worst-case scenarios in terms of financial loss, time loss, etc. Look at what you will learn if that happens, and accept and come to terms with that before you ever start.
I had no idea that this world existed outside of projects, outside of, some of my friends with food stamps, outside of, we can't afford it, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. And if you think about ABCs, the impact of ABCs, language. First there's gaga goo goo, then there's language, then there's the baby can now say ball. Now there's sentences, paragraphs, essays, books, libraries. The impact of someone growing up in a struggled household where there's fear-based, insecurity-based, all of that, that's a form of language. Most people don't know the language outside of that because they stay inside, watch the same TV shows, listen to the same radio station, hang around the same friends, never read.
And ask yourself the question, is that where I want to be? And if the answer is no, then you need to find a new path. To just get to understand yourself. You don't know what you need in your life until you figure out who you are.
If you were not developing a purpose, and if you were not resourceful, relentless, and resilient in your pursuit of your purpose, you will never achieve it. And like a dog who lacks purpose, service, and routine, you will fall into a place of depression and anxiety.
Welcome to the Bedros Keuilian Show.
Story time, friends. Let me tell you about this beautiful dog. Her name is Cookie. And Cookie is part Mastiff, part German Shepherd, and we rescued her from a house in Northern California. And I had never, ever met her in person before. And when I saw her picture on Facebook, this was about 6 or 7 years ago. Cookie's 7 years old now. She was about 8 months. I saw her picture on Facebook. Someone that I knew had posted a picture saying, hey, my neighbor is going to get rid of this dog, send it to the pound because she's gotten really big. She's only 8 months old, and the family doesn't want her because she's just a nuisance. And so when I saw Cookie's picture on Facebook, I was like, man, I got to have this dog. Anyway, my son at the time, he was 10, 11 years old. We flew out to San Francisco, rented a Cadillac Escalade, went to the house, met Cookie, fell in love with her, and drove back with her the 8 hours. And when we got Cookie home, now remember, Cookie is part Mastiff, part German Shepherd, so that's a big girl. Within the first week, I realized that we need to figure something out because Cookie is dragging my wife, dragging my son and my daughter by the leash. I'm barely holding on to the leash when I take her for a walk, and I'm realizing that at this point, this dog is about to get someone injured. If she decides to bolt after something, my wife and my kids aren't going to be able to hold on to her. So I figured, all right, what do we do? Well, we'll get an expert to train her, to teach her some manners, right? And so we looked up this dog whisperer, and we found this awesome lady from Temecula, California, and she comes to our house and she works with Cookie for like 4 or 5 weeks and teaches her all these manners. So all these things, right? And Cookie becomes this well-disciplined dog. But on that last day that she worked with Cookie, she asked me to come on over, and I said, hey, what's up? How can I help? She goes, well, I need to teach you something about your dog. I go, what's that? She goes, your dog needs to know that she is part of the family, and she needs to know she's part of the family by protecting your family, by protecting your household, your kids. She's part shepherd, after all, and so she needs to shepherd around your kids. And she goes, this dog also needs a good routine. Like, she needs to chase a ball, she needs to get her exercise in, and it needs to be consistent. And she needs to have this feeling of purpose. I'm like, all right, makes sense. And this woman, she's really driving this point home. She goes, no, I don't think you understand, sir. Like, your dog needs purpose. Your dog needs routine every morning. Your dog needs to know that she's part of the family and that she's shepherding and protecting. Like, she needs a job. She needs a reason to exist. I'm like, okay, I get it. I get it. She goes, otherwise, you see that beautiful rose garden of yours? And she points out to our big backyard, and there's a giant corner with the rose garden. She goes, that dog will end up digging holes all over that rose garden if you don't give her a sense of purpose and routine. In the absence of having purpose and routine, she will give herself purpose and routine. And she'll do that by digging holes in your yard every day to give herself something to do. So it is your job to give her that sense of purpose and routine. And I realized in that moment that we are no different than a German Shepherd. We are no different than a dog when you think about it, right? So you think and I think that we're so evolved and we're humans and therefore we should have different standards. We really don't. The reality is that we're just like a dog. We need to serve, we need purpose, we need routine. And in the absence of service, purpose, and routine, guess what? We begin to dig holes in our life, don't we? And so the topic of today's show is really this millionaire success mindset. Like, when I think about how I was able to build my empire, how I was able to build my companies, build an international fitness franchise, supplement company, coaching business, the project, experiential events, take equity in different companies and be an investor in half a dozen other companies, it all came down to purpose, service, routine. And I want to break this down for you guys because, again, if you don't have it, you will find yourself digging holes in your life. And so understand that purpose is a fundamental core component of successful people. All successful people, people that have fulfillment, that have meaning, that have significance, have purpose. Now, you might say, well, then how do I find my purpose? Well, Cookie's purpose is to guard the house. Cookie's purpose is to play ball with me in the mornings, right? Cookie's purpose is to shepherd my kids around the property. I'll tell you a funny story. When my kids were small, they'd go in the swimming pool in the backyard. They dive into the pool on one end, and Cookie would watch them, and she'd keep an eye on them, and then the kids would go underwater and swim all the way to the other end, and Cookie would look at me panically like, hey, my kids disappeared. What do I do? And the kids would pop out on the other side, and then Cookie would go running, and she'd be happy to see her kids again because she feels like she's got this duty and responsibility to look after these kids. And when she has this duty and responsibility to look after these kids, my dog's not going to be depressed. My dog's not going to be anxious. Believe it or not, dogs do get anxious and depressed. And in the absence of that purpose and service and routine, she will start digging holes in the backyard, right? And so I'm happy to report to you, 7 years in, Cookie has not dug any holes. But what about you? What about the holes that you're digging in your life? What about the fact that you are still where you were last year and the year before and the year before that? And I want to talk to you about developing your purpose because so many people out there think that they need to go out and find their purpose. Your purpose is not lost. It's not like a thing that's lost under a rock or behind a tree that you're going to go find. You've got to develop your purpose. And I can tell you that for me, my purpose is to coach humanity to their highest level, right? I figured that out about myself. But that journey started some 23 years ago when I was a personal trainer. See, even as a personal trainer, I was still a coach, except I was helping people with their fitness goals because fitness changed and transformed my life. Working out helped me lose the weight, gave me confidence and self-esteem and self-worth, made me feel like I was worthy of love and acceptance by humanity. Like all throughout high school, man, I walked around feeling like a ghost. Senior year of high school, when I came back my senior year of high school after losing 30 pounds the summer before, because I finally started working out and eating right because a classmate who was a football player taught me how to eat right and train. He took me into the school gym. Man, that was the greatest gift anyone could have given me. Like I thought I was just transforming my body, but as it turns out, I transformed my mind. I transformed my trajectory in life, right? And so I always talk about fitness being the gateway drug, but that was a gateway drug for me. So I decided that I'm going to be a personal trainer and I want to help other people achieve the same level of development, of growth, of self-actualization, of health that I did. And what I realized as a personal trainer, though, and this is how you develop your purpose, I realized, you know what? As much as I love personally training people in the gym, like putting them through their workouts and giving them meal plans to eat and how to manipulate their carbs and their fat and their protein to help them build muscle and lose fat, what I loved even more was the conversations I would have with my clients between sets. What I loved even more is giving them those aha moments, giving them those mental breakthroughs, helping them to break belief systems that they had that were limiting them, right? And so I was like, man, I wonder if there's like such thing as, coaching people in their mindset. As it turns out, there was, right? And so today I'm a business coach, I'm a mindset coach, I guess you can say I'm a life coach, I'm a high performance coach, whatever you want to say. I've really whittled down what my core purpose is in life. And over those 20 years, I figured out that as I go through different phases of life, my purpose changes, but it still stays in that same category of serving others. And so you might wonder then, hey man, how do I find my purpose? Like where do I start, right? How do I develop it? For me, remember I said I started off as a personal trainer. And I started off as a personal trainer because I would have done it for free. I would have trained people for free if I could help them have the aha moment that I did, that I got more confident, I built more self-esteem, I had more self-value, self-worth, right? I got fit and jacked and athletic, and I was so proud of my physique. I was like, man, I would do this for free. And so I'm asking you, if you want to develop your purpose, challenge yourself. Like this is what I do with my coaching clients. When they're with me and they're like, all right, man, look, I'm making good money, but I feel like I'm called to do something different, but I don't know what I'm called to do. I feel like I have different purpose. Because believe it or not, there's plenty of people out there who make a shit ton of money. Like I've got coaching clients who come to me and they're making $30, $40 million a year in their businesses. And they're like, you know what, man, I feel out of alignment. I feel incongruent with the business that I'm running now. And I feel like there's more that I could be doing, more contribution I could be making, that I could be serving a different market space. I'm like, well, what is it? I'm like, I don't know. And here's how I help them develop and figure out what that is. I go, well, let's say that your business is going to rock and roll on its own. It's going to keep going on its own. It's going to feed your lifestyle. If all of your life expenses were taken care of and you still have the same awesome lifestyle, you don't have to worry about running your business, what would you go out there and do for free? What would you do for free? And immediately they'll be like, boom, I would do this. I'm like, great. Then be so good at it that people pay you. And that's all I did with personal training. That's how I became an entrepreneur. And if you look at all my businesses, all of my businesses offer some level of coaching. All of my businesses take our customers and clients and franchisees and elevate them to a place of higher frequency, to a place of higher self-actualization, to a place of breaking limiting beliefs, right? All of my businesses are literally personal development programs. And I share that with you because that is a meaningful work that I do. That is fulfilling. That gives me significance. I sleep better at night when I do that. And I would do that for free, but I got so good at it that people pay me for it, right? I would have done personal training for free, but I got so good at it that people paid me for it. And over time, though, as you get older, you mature, you get married. I had kids. I realized, all right, maybe I don't want to be in the gym all the time working with clients. Maybe I can create a franchise where people can open up gyms that I've created, and they could start helping people lose weight, get fit, build a positive mental attitude, realize that they're meant for more, break through limiting beliefs, right? And that's what Fit Body Bootcamp does, one of my companies. And I share this with you because you might know what your purpose is today, but 5 or 10 years from now, when you're in a different phase of life, you may be out of alignment and incongruent with what you're doing. You have to once again ask yourself, I'm in a new phase of life. What's going on? What am I feeling? I'm making all this money, yet I'm not happy. Because don't forget, man, you change, you evolve, you grow. It's the human condition, Like, don't sound like you're, God, I love pizza so much, I'm going to eat pizza the rest of my life. You're going to start hating pizza. But at some point, if you realize that, well, as much as I love pizza, now I'm into steak. Now I'm into chicken. Now I'm into fish. Now I'm into sushi, right? It is okay to have new phases of life. That is the human condition. In fact, I would be worried if you're stuck at the same place the rest of your life, because all of life is growth. And guys, I share this with you because if you could figure out what you would do for free because you love it so much, I would challenge you to get so good at it that people pay you, and that is how you develop your purpose. And so once you do that, that's one part of the millionaire mindset. The other part of the millionaire mindset are the 3 R's. And the 3 R's are this. Thing number 1, every millionaire that I know who's successful and who is thriving and who's able to persevere through hard times, every single one of them, follow these 3 R's. The first R is resourcefulness. See, oftentimes you're not going to have the resources you need to get where you want, because once you develop your purpose, like, man, this is what I want to do in life. This is who I want to serve, right? Like, I know that I'm supposed to be a coach, a mentor, but if I don't have the money, which is a resource, then I have to get resourceful, don't I? And let me tell you guys a story of resourcefulness. See, when we came to America back in 1980, I was 6 years old. 2 years later, by the age of 8, we were living in shade tree apartments in Anaheim, California. We had already moved out of Santa Ana at this point. And at Shade Tree Apartments, the apartment complex, I think it was Section 8 housing as well there. The complex was so filthy, so dirty, that I got lice in my hair as a kid. And we were still trying to make ends meet. My family, we were broke, right? We came to this country with under $200 in my dad's pocket, family of 5. I was the youngest, 6 years old. So here we are now, I'm 8 years old. It's 1982, and I've got lice. And the school sends me home, and my mom's like, well, we can't afford lice treatment. So she has my dad siphon out gasoline from a parked car, and she washes my hair with gasoline to kill the lice, right? It was a free solution to lice versus going to the drugstore and buying lice treatment. The reason I share this with you is in the absence of having the money, the resources, she got resourceful and she got my dad to siphon out gasoline, like a jar of gasoline, and wash my hair with it. And oftentimes in life, like millionaires who have this success mindset realize that they have to be resourceful when they don't have the resources. You can't just stop simply because you don't have the resources. You got to get scrappy and get resourceful. That's R number 1. R number 2 is to be relentless. It is to constantly go to war with everything that you're doing. I'll give you an example. When I go into the gym every morning, I go to war with my body. I go to war with the weights. I go to war with my mindset, with that bitch voice in my head that says, put the weights down. You've done enough sets and reps. I go to war with that little critic in my head. Remember, we've talked about the inner critic and the inner advocate, right? The bitch and the beast. The bitch is the inner critic. The beast is the advocate. The advocate supports you, roots you on, cheers for you. But the critic, your inner bitch, is always doubting you and telling you that you can't and that you've done enough and to set lower goals and expectations of yourself. And so when I go into the gym every morning, I am battling that inner bitch. I am battling the heavy weights. When I come to work, I imagine in my head this relentless mindset that I have, that there's someone out there and their only life's mission is to put me out of business. Like, I truly believe that there's someone out there with this marker board that says, how do I put Fit Body Bootcamp out of business? How do I put Truling out of business? How do I put Modern Day Night Project out of business? How do I put Bedros Keuilian out of business? And I know you're like, damn, bro, that sounds intense. Yes, be intense. The millionaire success mindset requires you to be intense, to be unreasonable with your goals, to be relentless. I go to war with everything I do. If I'm sitting in a L10 meeting, a level 10 meeting with any of my leadership teams, like, to me, that's the war room. We are at war, and how we're going to figure out how to get leads and market and create funnels and make offers and run ads and get the lowest cost per click. Because I'm at war with the competition at that point, right? You got to go into everything with the relentless mindset. on date night with the wife. I'm at war with all the other men out there who are taking their wives out on dates. That I'm gonna have the best date night out there with my wife. We're gonna go to the best place. We're gonna have the most fun. We're gonna laugh. We're gonna have a great time. Like, be willing to go to war with everything. Be relentless, right? It's a game. It's a psychological game you play. Because if you're just like ho-hum about everything, then how boring does life get? And the third R is resilience. Think about that. You've got to be resilient. You're going to be knocked down on your ass 100 times. In business, in life, you're going to be knocked down on your ass 100 times. Things are not going to go your way. You're going to have a plan, and your plan only looks perfect on paper. But I can tell you this, the moment you go to execute your plan, many things will go wrong. And when they do, are you going to be resilient, get knocked down and get back up? Or are you just going to play the victim, play dead, say, well, this wasn't meant to be, and fail? To me, there's no such thing as failure. There are temporary defeats, but there's no such thing as failure. And I share that with you because if you can be resourceful, if you can be relentless, and if you could be resilient, then you will make it in life. Understand that problems are a part of life. Understand that problems are good. They are there to help you build your problem-solving muscles. See, most people think that the only muscles they have are the muscles on their body. But you've got mental muscles. You've got emotional muscles. You've got problem-solving muscles. You've got money-making muscles. And you need things to go wrong so that you can exercise those muscles. And resiliency, the best example of resiliency that I can give you is the difference between the garden weed and an orchid. See, when people come to a party, like if you have a little party at your house, someone's going to show up with a bottle of wine, and then they're going to go into the grocery store and buy this beautiful little orchid, and they're going to come to your house and they go, hey, look, thanks for inviting us to your party. Brought you a bottle of wine, brought you an orchid, look how pretty it is. And true, the orchid is pretty, but the orchid is goddamn fragile. What I mean by this is the orchid, if it gets too much sun, it dies. Too much water, it dies. Not enough water, it dies. If you plant the orchid next to another plant, it dies. That's why orchids are just like in their own little solo container. And if you ever look at an orchid, it's got a little stick. They put a little stick next to it, and they use little hair clips to hold the little motherfucker up. It can't even hold up its own neck. That's how fucking weak the orchid is. Yes, it's pretty, but it's weak. Now, do you want to be an orchid, or do you want to be a garden weed? A garden weed, on the other hand, a garden weed is resilient, isn't it? Because a garden weed has such resiliency. I've seen garden weeds grow out of cement, out of the side of a telephone pole. I've seen it grow out of concrete. I've seen it grow in my backyard. I've gone to Home Depot and Lowe's back in the day and looking for some kind of garden weed spray to kill the weeds. And no matter what I use, the fucking weeds keep coming back. Like, I want to be a garden weed, not an orchid. A garden weed is resilient. It will grow out of anything. One time on my pool deck, right where the two pieces of concrete join together, those little cracks, those joints that the construction company puts there on purpose so that your concrete can expand and contract, there was a weed growing right out of there. I went to pick the motherfucker and it just kind of ended up in my hands. It wasn't even dug into the ground. It was literally growing in a crack in the middle of the air. It doesn't need water. It doesn't need fucking sunshine. It doesn't need hot or garden weed will grow anywhere. That is the resilient mindset that you need. Guys, and I share this with you because if you were not developing a purpose, and if you were not resourceful, relentless, and resilient in your pursuit of your purpose, you will never achieve it. And like a dog who lacks purpose, service, and routine, you will fall into a place of depression and anxiety. Remember, I told you that that woman who trained my dog said, this beautiful dog of yours, Cookie, will fall into a state of depression and anxiety in the absence of purpose, routine, and service. You are no different. You will fall into a state of depression and anxiety and start digging holes in your life, just like Cookie digs holes in the backyard if she ever gets depressed and anxious, and she doesn't, because we take great care of her. We give her a sense of purpose. We give her a sense of meaning. She shepherds my kids around. She looks after the security of the house. She plays ball with me every morning. So when you develop your purpose and when you begin to build your resourcefulness, your relentlessness, and your resiliency, you will develop the mindset required to build a multi-million-dollar empire, a multi-million-dollar relationship, a multi-million-dollar physique, a multi-million-dollar mindset, multi-million-dollar legacy. And that's what I want for you. Because you know that average is the enemy, success is your duty, and everything.
For a live interactive workshop where I'm going to take you through a series of exercises, a series of challenges, a series of interactive workshops where you can actually find out more about yourself. And today's theme is all about how you can find your passions and pursue them, right? How do we understand what we're passionate about? How do we understand what we really connect with? And how do we actually make that something that we can pursue, make it a reality, and actually have an action plan that lets us experience those benefits? I wanted to start off talking to you about a specific model that I think is really, really interesting, which you may have heard of and you may not have heard of. But why are we exploring passion in the first place? The incredible thing is that research shows that when you live your passion, you're adding 8 hours of joy to your life, right? Scientific research proves that the more we live our passions, the more joy, energy, enthusiasm that we're bringing into our lives on a daily basis. That has a trickle effect into your relationships, your work, how you feel. So connecting to our passions is something that we all really need to take into account, especially if we want to increase our fulfillment. Now, there's a few stages that it starts at, and I'm going to take you into this model, which is a brilliant model. It's actually a Japanese model, and it's called Ikigai. That's Ikigai. You may have heard of it, you may never heard of it. But what it means, if I translate that, is a reason for being, right? In Japanese, Ikigai means a reason for being, or what we would call today, the reason you get up in the morning, right? What really motivates you, what gets you pumped to actually be up and awake in the morning and to do something. Now, this model's got a few really, really interesting parts. So it talks about the 4 things we need to find a reason for being, right? The number one thing it talks about is what you love doing, right? What do you do that you love doing? Another thing is, what do you do that you're actually good at, right? People actually say to you, think of something in your life now that you're good at, right? That you're like, oh yeah, people tell me I'm good at that. When I finish that exercise, people say, well done for that, right? They congratulate you, they notice it, they recognize you. That's things that you're good at. Think about them right now, and I want you to write them in the comment section. So think about the things that you love, write them in the comment section. What are they? I'll read them out. And also think about the things that you're good at. Write them out in the comment section as well. The third thing, the area where we're not really going to go into today, but we will do in the future, is world needs. What does the world need? What do you have that you can contribute to making a difference in the world? And finally, it talks about what you can actually get paid for, right? To actually make a living. Today, we're going to focus on these 2 sections. This intersect here is called passion, which is exactly the intersect we are talking about today. This intersect here is called mission, right? Which we won't go into today so much, but definitely something to consider. This intersect here is called your job, right? And this intersect here is called a vocation. So that is Ikigai, reason for being. Maybe you've seen it before, maybe you've never seen it before, but hopefully this is giving you a perspective of where we're going to start. So we're going to dive in here. What do you love doing and what are you actually good at? What do people notice? How many times have you ever been told, follow your dreams? Right? We've all heard that before. But where do you start? Right? Where do you start? What do you start working on? What else helps you uncover those things? When we were young, you went to school, you were doing so many things. I want you to start off by thinking about one thing. I want you to think back to a moment where you felt you were in your element, where you felt you were in flow. It may have been a challenging situation, but to you it felt somewhat effortless. You were performing an activity. You were doing some sort of teamwork with another group. Now, the challenges that we usually think of, when someone asks you to think of your passions, we immediately start thinking of hobbies like art, music, drama, right? Science, whatever it is, we start thinking of containers. Because for a long, long time in our lives, we've been trained to believe that everything comes in boxes, everything comes in containers. We think of careers as containers. We think of careers as boxes. But the incredible thing about finding your passion is that our passions are more like environments that we thrive in. right? Our passions, or our natures as they're called in ancient traditions, is actually environments, a group of elements coming together that means someone can thrive. It may mean for you that you work better in teams. It may mean for you that you work better alone. Those are environments, environmental signals that you can find if you're just conscious and aware of when you're in flow, when you're excited, when you're making a difference, when you're making a change. That can be part of yours too. So let's start by looking at this model that I created a while ago. This is something that I came up that I think will be really, really useful today, and I hope that you connect with it as well. And what advice do you have for someone in her 60s and is starting a new chapter? And I'm so happy to hear that. The incredible thing about Ikigai and nature and finding your purpose. From when I lived as a monk in India, I was taught about this and we were thinking about these themes. There's no age limit. It never says that once you're this age, you can't have a new chapter. So first of all, it's phenomenal to hear that. I'm really happy to hear that. And my advice would be try and apply this model right now, because with your time, you can maximize the impact. So this is called what I call the quadrant of success, right? And it breaks down our core activities on a daily basis. And I want you to draw this quadrant on a piece of paper right in front of you right now and fill it out. So I want you to mark the first area of the quadrant, what you love and are good at, right? What do you do and you're good at it? Now, the best way to know this is ask friends for feedback. Your friends will tell you, oh, you're really good at that. You're really good at that. Oh, maybe that's something that I've noticed that you excel at. Another way of asking the question is go up to your friends and say, what difference do I make in your life? Like, why do you like having me as a friend? They may think you're weird at the start, but I promise you the answer will help you answer this question. Asking them, how do I make a difference in your life? Why do we connect? You know, what is it that I add to your life? What value am I adding? And your friends will be able to tell you. So what you love and what you're good at, that is your passion, right? So I want you to write a list of things. You may have one thing, you may have 10 things, you may have 5 things. It doesn't matter. Write them out. Don't worry about humility at this point. Write down things in the most honest way, things that you know you're good at and connect with. Jamie, what if you are good at many things? Awesome, Jamie. Write them down in this quadrant. It doesn't matter. That's absolutely fine. Arun, I don't know what passion is. I'm good at multiple things, but I'm not sure what to start to figure it out. That's absolutely brilliant. You're in the right place as well. So write this out, a long list of what you love and are good at, right? Passion. Now I want you to write down the second quadrant is what you don't love but are good at, right? And I'll give you some examples as well for me. And this thing is what I called paying bills, right? This stuff pays the bills, this stuff's your passion. So I'll give you an example. What I love and what I'm good at. I love reading and I love sharing what I'm learning. That's something that I love doing, and I hope that I'm somewhat okay at it. It's something that I enjoy. It's something that I like learning about. What I don't love but I'm good at is maths, right? I'm pretty good with numbers, but I really don't like numbers. I can do them, but I don't really like them, right? Think about the things in your life that you don't love but are good at. Normally, these are the things that we do to pay the bills. They're things that make money. There are jobs, there are professions, there are careers, right? Think about what they are, write them out, right? It's the things that you don't love but are good at. People know you're capable at them. How many of you ever get asked to organize weddings, organize parties, organize events? Now, if you love doing that, put it in this column. If you don't love doing that, put it in this column if you're good at them, right? I hope this is making sense. I hope you're with me. Make sure you're doing this exercise as we go through. Now, the next thing I want to ask you is the fourth area is what you love but are not good at. What do you love? What do you love learning? What are you like always open to finding more about, but you're not quite there yet? You wouldn't call yourself an expert in that space. You wouldn't call yourself even a semi-professional in that space, right? You're still an amateur. This is your potential, right? This is what we call potential. It's something that if you were given the time and tools to learn about, you would just go all in. You'd get excited about it. You'd get enthused about it. You'd have energy about it. Write in that column what it is. So I could add a load of things to those comments. I think one of them for me would be script writing. I'd love to learn more about film writing and video writing and script writing. So I'd go into that and I'd look at that, right? That's not something that I've worked on. In the past, I've had things in this category that I now do. So this is your potential. What do you love but are not that good at yet? Yet being the key, but you love it. You have a passion for it. You want to learn about it. And finally, the fourth and final quadrant of success is what don't you love and are not good at, right? What do you not love and are not good at? These are the daily tasks we all have to do, right? And we may not be good at them. You may be good at them, but it's things like washing up the dishes, right? It's things like taking the dog for a walk. Maybe you love doing that, so that can go in a different category. But it's the stuff that you don't love and are not that good at, right? Write down what they are. Patrick, what if I don't love, but I should be doing it? About my profession. Patrick, exactly. So what are the things that we find with this quadrant is we spend most of our lives in this space and this space. We spend most of our lives focusing on what we don't love but are good at, and what you don't love and are not good at. A lot of our time is spent in these two quadrants. Now that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not putting out a message there saying everyone needs to change their job. I'm not saying that if you're not loving what you do every day, quit today and go out there and do something else. What I'm saying is, if we want to live a life of fulfillment and passion and purpose, we need to increase the amount of time and priority we dedicate to these two, right? These two deserve more time, more priority, more energy. And we need to find that. We need to create that. We need to create space in our lives where we can start focusing in on these two segments of the quadrant and not these two. These two are things we have to do. These two are the things we want to do, love to do, and will drive that joy, drive that passion, drive that fulfillment and happiness in our lives. So I really want you to identify these first of all. The reason why we never give these time is because we've never had time to identify them. And this gives us an opportunity to start doing that. So I hope that answers your question. Tina, I love helping people and I'm a good organizer. But at 56 feel the need to change but not sure what to do. Well, that's what I'm talking about. These are things that you can start doing on the weekend. It's things you can start doing on the evening, right? Creating joy in your life doesn't mean you need to make it your 9 to 5. It's awesome if you can make your daydream your day job, right? That's brilliant. If you can make your passion your paycheck, that's awesome. And I encourage you all who are out there who have that risk, who want to make that happen, go out there and do it. But if you're on the side of you need to think about security, stability, really think about investing in that talent first. And this is another interesting and incredibly important point and critical point I need to make, is that these two areas require deep investment and learning, right? Just because we love something and we're good at it doesn't mean that level of expertise, that level of experience is enough. We need to go all in. We need to go full throttle. You know what the challenging thing is? We've always built this conveyor belt idea of life. We've built this thought process that we go to school, we get a degree, we graduate, we get a good job, get married, whatever it is, like this conveyor belt of activity. And all of a sudden, when we realize that that conveyor belt doesn't actually work, and that conveyor belt may not even be right, it surprises us, it shocks us, because it's almost the conveyor belt we always saw. And what I always say is that we were made for a lot more than to go to work, pay bills and die, right? We all have a lot more meaning in our lives than that. Tell me if you believe you've got a lot more meaning in your life than that, a lot more ambition than that. And we all do. So the way to uncover it means we've got to sometimes say plot twist and pivot, right? Sometimes life changes. And more often than not, change is the only thing that's certain in life. So the more we open ourselves up to that principle, the more likely we are able to make these changes. Now I'm going to do a quick switch here to show you the next phase of what I wanted to talk to you about. And this is where you're really going to learn about yourself. This is where you're really going to understand more about the way you work. Now I'm going to ask you two questions, and I want you to answer these two questions, right? Think about these two questions very closely, and I'll explain what I mean by them. Do you believe that you're more outgoing or more reserved, right? Answer this question for me. Do you believe you're more outgoing or more reserved? Now, I'll explain to you what I mean by those. Outgoing people are the people who are always in the center of the room. They pull people to come out with them. They're the ones who organize the party. Or even if they didn't organize it, they're the one who are going to steal the show, steal the party, right? Outgoing people. Reserved people doesn't mean you're not as confident. It just means that you're more likely to sit on the periphery of the audience. You may be dragged out last minute. You may not really have wanted to go, but you made it out anyway. Right? Recognize neither of these are strengths or weaknesses. Neither of these are advantages or disadvantages. It's just our natural disposition. It's the way we...
Sorry to interrupt, but brain embodiment, thought, and feeling.
Yeah, so you're asking the key questions. Emotions are very hard to describe in an objective way, whereas states have certain properties that allow us to study them in different laboratories and from one experiment to the next. So some people may have heard this before, but the brain does really 5 things. We have sensation, which is, we're constantly being bombarded with sound waves and light and smells and things. And that stuff is ongoing and you can't negotiate that. It's just you have these receptors in your body that allow you to evaluate those things. A sea turtle has magnetoreception. It can navigate by magnetic fields. Wow. We cannot do that. But they can because they sense it. Infrared vision in a pit viper or something. So unless you put on, night vision goggles, you can't do that. Then there's perception, which is which sensations you are paying attention to. So as you write with your pen, if I say, what does that pen feel like in your hand? Now you're perceiving it. But the sensation was always there. Those receptors were always sensing it.
So the sensation being the actual feeling, or the actual visual, the perception is your interpretation of the feeling?
So I would say that the perceptions are where your attention is, which sensations you're attending to. And then you have thoughts. And thoughts get a little complicated for us to parse because they are a little bit abstract. But thoughts are a combination of our perception, whatever it is we're attending to, and they have context, memory. They're tapped into our memory systems, right? Because if I say a pen and you're like, I don't know what your relationship to pens is, but mine is kind of a trivial one. I write with one. But let's say I come from a family that, I don't know, had a pen factory in Germany in the 1930s. Then there's a whole...
Or you got stabbed by a pen.
Or you got stabbed by a pen, right. So it's very contextual. Yeah. So thoughts are like perceptions, but they carry memory and context.
Thoughts are memory and context.
Yeah, they include that. And then there are feelings/emotions. And this is where it really starts to get abstract and kind of hazy, and where there's still a lot of debate. Because, for instance, if I ask you how you're feeling and you say, most people say, I feel good. Well, what does that mean? I mean, that's not a feeling. So if you ever do personal development work, they're always like, don't say good or bad. What do you feel? And people will say, well, I feel calm and excited or something like, and it starts becoming very abstract. And so emotions are a real thing, and they certainly, perhaps more than anything else, recruit the brain and the body. When we feel depressed, we occupy certain postures, we feel it in our gut, we feel it in our limbs, we can feel fatigue, we can feel anxious, and so the emotions are really where you capture that mind, the brain-body contract and relationship very, very intensely. Okay. And then the 5th thing is actions. And what I love about actions and behaviors is they are very concrete. You're writing with your pen now, I'm speaking, I'm moving my hands. You can measure those things, you can analyze them, we know exactly what the neural pathways are. So we've got sensation, perception, emotions, and actions.
Thoughts, yep.
And then, of course, beneath all that, you've got memories, and people always like to raise intuition. They always say, what about that 6th thing, intuition? And we could talk about intuition, but the reason I like to talk about states and the reason we study states in my lab is that states have 2 properties that are easy to study somewhat compared to emotions. And that's how pervasive they are, meaning how long-lasting they are. States tend to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Whereas emotions, it's sort of like they're more in combination. States are more like the primary colors from which you mix you get all the emotions. Yeah. And the other thing is that they have an intensity that we can measure. You can have a state of being very alert or very drowsy or asleep.
And you can say from a 1 to 10, how are you feeling in this state?
That's right. And we can measure
that experience.
That's right. And we can correlate it with things like heart rate variability, breathing speed, sweating, levels of neural activity in brain areas that control wakefulness. And so I will be the first to say that I would love to be able to say that in my laboratory we are studying, or someday we'll study, awe and flow and all those things. But those are higher up on the ladder than we can get to right now. I think with the current technology, we can understand states, and from there, I do believe that we can make a significant dent into certain mental health issues and optimize performance in certain communities that are trying to optimize performance and in the general public. But the states that we're focused on are very concrete. For instance, alert and focused. That would be a wonderful state to understand and be able to direct ourselves toward when we're not feeling alert and focused.
How to get into that state.
How to get into that state. And we could talk about tools for that if you like. Sleep. Sleep is so powerful and so important. I think now people really understand the extent to which it's important, in large part because of Matt Walker's book, Why We Sleep, and the important work that he's done in his lab at Berkeley and many other labs as well, of course. So focus, sleep, creativity, stress. These are the kind of core states that we would like to tackle first because we believe we can. And then hopefully in my career, but if not in my career, then maybe one of my scientific offspring or another laboratory, 10, 20, 100 years from now, we'll be able to understand things like how does one get into a state of empathy? I mean, we could spend the whole hour talking about empathy, but it's hard, and it's a fascinating topic, and it's so important, but it's just very hard to understand at a neural level. So we're starting with the basics, with the confidence that by understanding those basics, they will build up to richer representations and understanding of things like empathy someday.
Yeah. Would you need to be studying the heart as well to understand empathy, or does it all come from the mind?
It's a great question. So to understand any state, we believe that you have to study the brain and the spinal cord and the body.
Wow.
So in my lab, we talk about being neuroscientists. For me, that means we study the nervous system, the whole thing. So people who come into my laboratory, we put them into VR environments that simulate some experience. And I realize it's not as real as being in the actual experience in the real world, but you get enough presence, especially because it's very visually and auditorily rich in those environments. People get what's called presence. They forget that they're in a VR environment, at least for moments. And in that time, we're measuring heart rate variability, we're measuring sweating, we're measuring, in many cases, we also have electrodes lowered into their brain because we do this with neurosurgery patients. And so we have access to the brain, we have access to the body, and it's really by recording from all these areas of the brain and body that we can get a fuller understanding of what a state of, say, focus or stress or anxiety really is. If we were just looking in one little corner of the brain or just at the heart, we wouldn't be able to do that. And so that's a kind of a centerpiece of our lab, is that brain and body, the whole nervous system is the key. You got to look at all of it.
With feelings, I want to talk about feelings and emotions for a second. Can a person make it so they never get depressed? They never react to their perception, their people's actions towards them, where they never get to a state of, I don't feel good, I'm feeling more depressed, I'm in a dark place now, I'm stuck in this place. Is there a way that we could ever defend ourselves against negative stressors, negative emotions? Or do we need them as well to have contrast in life?
Well, there's sort of two views on this. I'll reveal mine after I explain the two views. One is that these states, I guess I'm automatically calling things like depression a state of mind and body. So when I say state of mind, I mean brain and body.
Because your body is really feeling, it's like the brain is connected to the body.
Right.
And so if you're saying internally the thought of like, I'm depressed, or I don't feel good, or I'm sad, or I'm lonely, or I'm not good enough, the body's going to react. Is that what I'm understanding?
Absolutely.
Like the body's going to manifest what the mind is telling you.
Absolutely.
The thought, the idea, you're going to be like, I'm sad, I'm not good enough. You're going to shrink.
Right.
Is that right?
That's right. I mean, there are really two forms of depression. Sometimes they're intermixed, but one is anxiety-associated depression. And you, if you've ever experienced it, or for anyone that's experienced it, they feel agitation in their body. And their mind races, but in their body. So the body is recruited. There are also depressive states that people feel very fatigued and exhausted. It's an overwhelm. And they also experience that in their body. The idea of getting out of bed in the morning is hard. Motivating to exercise, doing the sorts of things that we know are powerful for pushing back on depression. So the body is recruited. I think most people would say that depressive states are bad when they bring down the baseline on life. As a brief aside, anytime there's a question about mental health or addiction or trauma or anything, one could look at it and make up some argument of, well, evolutionarily, this makes sense, we all get depressed, but we have to be fair to the person experiencing it, of course, and have sensitivity that some behaviors will keep the baseline of our life steady, meaning job, relationships, etc., will continue as they are. Other activities will tend to improve the baseline on our life. Job, activities, relationship, etc., will improve. And then there's some things like heroin, which does very quickly, we can predict that very quickly the baseline on life is going to creep down regardless of who that person is, right? So people say, can you get addicted to water? Well, maybe, but I have to drink a lot of water before the baseline of my life starts to go down.
So it just feels uncomfortable.
That's
it's
right.
It's like, man, I'm so bloated
Exactly.
all day.
So we tend to throw around things like addiction and depression a little loosely. So
yeah.
I think that it's fair to say that depression is wired into us as a possible state that we can all fall into. but that it's very important, in my opinion, that humans have tools to remove themselves from that state. Of course, to avoid tragedies like suicide, but also because when the baseline on someone's life goes down far enough, they find it increasingly hard to do the sorts of things that are going to get them out of depression. So you or I could say...
So they stay in that state of depression because
That's right.
It's too hard to go work out. It's too hard to change my habit of eating healthier. So I'm going to stay... I'm going to keep eating ice cream, which is going to make my body... depressed.
That's right.
Right? If I keep eating bad foods, if I keep staying up till 4 a.m., if I keep staying in a toxic relationship, I'm going to feel depressed.
That's right. And eventually, because of this very inseparable relationship between the brain and body, eventually what happens is that because the brain controls the body, but also the body can control the brain, people lose the ability to intervene in this depressive process. So you or I could say, look, if someone who's depressed, what they need to do is get up early, get some light in their eyes, get some movement. I know you put this information out there, which I love, because those tips are grounded in, they're not even tips, they're really tools.
Yes.
And they're very powerful because they're grounded in excellent science. You get that dopamine release early in the day that's antidepressive. You time your sleep better when you get sun in your eyes and you get movement early in the day. For most people, that's accessible, and they absolutely should be doing it. Everyone should be doing that. But for people who are far enough down that path of depression, because the body and the mind have this relationship that's so close, there is a crossover point where they really can't do those activities.
Because they're so far deep into depression?
The body won't do what they decide to do. And so, now I'm not trying to give anyone a pass, because ultimately we are all responsible for our own mental health. Certainly adults more than kids, but we're all responsible for our own mental health, and only we can direct our own brain changes. That's the stinger. Once we're 25 years and older, we are the only ones that can change our brain. And we can talk about neuroplasticity if you like, but the depressed person has to take responsibility for their behavior. But this is why it's so important to catch this brain-body relationship early and build routines that keep one out of depression. So that was a long path back to answer your question succinctly, I hope, which is we can stay out of depression, but we have to keep depression at bay by doing things regularly. The same way we can stay out of obesity by eating the right foods in the right times and ratios and things of that sort. But once one is obese, there are massive endocrine changes, type 2 diabetes, that make it hard to eat correctly. Right? So there's this
It's hard to get out of it. It's hard to go back to a healthy state.
That's right. Once your insulin is dysregulated, you're hungry all the time. So it's much harder to control your hunger. Now,
and you have to have so much discipline and willpower to, I guess, break through and try to get back to a healthier state.
That's right.
Is that right? It's
That's
possible,
right.
is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely.
But it's really, really hard.
That's right.
So is depression a disease then? Are people who have certain brain chemistry that are born differently with their brains that are just more depressed? Or is it possible to get out of that state if you have the functionality to think, to act, to move, to create routines and habits for yourself? Is that possible?
Yeah, there are some genetic predispositions to depression. And there's certainly familial circumstances where trauma and challenge that can head people down that path. I think one of the reasons I'm involved in public education about neuroscience is I want people to understand the nervous system, and I want them to understand that there are tools that can allow them to intervene in their thoughts and feelings, and most of the time those involve bringing in behaviors and the actual actions, which are very concrete. And the reason is the following. It's very hard to control the mind just using thinking.
Just using the mind.
Just thinking. It's very hard to, if someone's stressed out and you say, calm down, it doesn't work. Telling ourselves calm down doesn't work.
So it's like, what's a tool? Breathe.
Right. So a specific tool.
Go outside for a walk.
A specific tool, right? And when it comes to depression and emotions, it's very hard to talk oneself out of an emotional state. It's just very challenging.
It's very hard.
That's right.
It's like when I talk to my girlfriend and she's just like, she's not happy about something, and she gets on a tangent, I'm like, there's nothing I can say to calm her down. There's nothing I can say to someone who's emotional about an idea in the moment until I'm like, okay, let's talk later. Otherwise, me trying to tell them to relax, that's not what you're thinking.
Counterproductive.
That's not what, it's not the truth. That's not what you're thinking or whatever. it's counterproductive, right?
Yeah.
Makes them more emotional.
Well, that's because these states, like these emotional states of mind, they recruit the whole nervous system. So we are actually a different
So your
person.
whole body is out of control.
Your mind, your body. Like for instance, if you're angry, upset, or stressed, your pupils dilate. This is subconscious. As a consequence of that, you view the world in a kind of like portrait mode, not panoramic, excuse me, portrait mode on your phone, where the thing that's upsetting you is in sharper focus and everything else is blurry. So you actually see the world differently. In addition to that, the timing, your perception of time, is now faster, so that things outside you seem to be moving more slowly in comparison to how you feel inside. You've experienced this if you were ever in line at the airport or something and it's taking a long time and you're about to miss your flight. It seems like the person in front of you is moving very slowly.
They're taking forever.
Yeah, but time is time. It's, it's moving at the same rate regardless. When you're very calm, or let's say you're fatigued, let's say you're exhausted, you didn't sleep well the night before, things in front of you are gonna seem like they're moving really fast. They're saying take off your shoes, putting them on the conveyor, and it's kind of overwhelming.
Like, slow down here.
That's right, because your internal clock is moving more slowly.
Yeah.
And so these states of mind, when someone's upset, they recruit their entire being, their way of being. And so one of the reasons why I mentioned that sensation, perception, feeling, thought, and action before is that the actions are very concrete. And because of this reciprocal relationship between the brain and body connects to body, body connects to brain, we know that when the mind isn't where we want it to be, we need to use the body to intervene.
What does that mean?
So there are two ways that you can shift your brain state quickly. You mentioned one already, which is respiration or breathing. And the reason is there's a direct connection from the brain to an organ in our body called the diaphragm, which is skeletal muscle. The diaphragm is designed to move the lungs up and down, bring in more oxygen, expel more oxygen. And it's unlike other organs like the heart or the spleen or the liver because it's actually made up of what's called striated muscle, just like a bicep, tricep, or quadricep. It can be voluntarily controlled. You can't voluntarily control your heart directly right now. Like you can't say speed up and speed it
Slow
up
down.
or slow it down.
But you can slow down your breathing,
You can do-
and you can slow down the way you think about things, I'm assuming, or change your thought to something else to help you be more relaxed.
That's right. So one of the reasons why breathing is such a powerful tool for shifting one's state is that it's always available for voluntary control. It's just right there. I can decide right now to do 3 inhales, or I can just go back to breathing reflexively. I can just do that at any moment. So the neural real estate, which is in the brainstem that controls breathing, is in a unique position because it's at the kind of boundary between conscious control and unconscious control. I can't do that for my digestion. I can't do that for most everything that happens internally. The other thing is that breathing controls our level of alertness very dramatically. So the faster you breathe, generally, the more alert you are. The slower you breathe, the more calm you're going to be.
The faster you breathe, meaning shorter, quick breaths, or
either way. So if we're just to take a brief adventure through the neuroscience of breathing and how it relates to brain states, and there's some fun tools in here. So forgive me for this tangent, but you have 2 brain areas that are responsible for breathing. One is called, for the aficionados, the pre-Buttsinger complex. It was discovered by Jack Feldman at UCLA. It's named after a bottle of wine, so now people won't forget it. And it controls rhythmic breathing. So inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. It's just rhythmic breathing. There's another brain area that controls breathing, which is near what's called the parafacial nucleus, which involves breathing anytime there are double inhales or double exhales or triple inhales. And you say, well, why would you have this second brain area for breathing? Well, it turns out when you're speaking or crying or coughing, you need to coordinate your breathing with your speaking. And that means sometimes you need to take multiple inhales or multiple exhales. And this is all happening very, very fast. You don't notice. But there's a very important discovery that was made a few years ago by Jack's lab and by a guy named Mark Krasno at Stanford, who discovered there's a set of neurons in your brainstem, my brainstem, everybody's brainstem, and every mammal's brainstem. It's a very small number of neurons that controls a specific pattern of breathing, which are called physiological sighs. So these are not just sighs where you go and exhale. These are sighs that involve doing 2 inhales and then an extended exhale.
We all do this.
You do this during sleep. Anytime carbon dioxide levels in your bloodstream get too high, in order to get more oxygen into your system. People also do this if they've been crying or sobbing. They'll do this and then they'll exhale. So what's happening with these physiological size and why is this powerful? So your lungs are 2 big bags of air, but they actually are made up of a ton of little sacs of air called the alveoli of the lungs. When we are exercising or when we are sleeping or anytime we're doing anything, these little sacs of air eventually start to collapse. And what happens is carbon dioxide builds up in our system and we experience that as stress. We actually feel the impulse to breathe because carbon dioxide levels get too high. There are neurons that sense carbon dioxide. And then without realizing it, you do a double inhale and then exhale. Typically the inhales are done through the nose and the exhale is done through the mouth. So it looks like... And why the second inhale? Well, if you've ever tried to blow up a balloon for a kid at a kid's party or just blown up a balloon, you sometimes blow into that empty balloon. It doesn't go anywhere. So what do? You do two in, you do two, you go, and then it pops open. So these double inhales pop open the alveoli of the lungs. They don't explode them, but they pop them open, which pulls carbon dioxide out of the bloodstream, brings oxygen, and then you offload carbon dioxide. So if you watch a dog right before it takes a nap or something, it often will do these. Now what's cool about these physiological size is from work in our lab, and that's still ongoing, I just want to say it's still ongoing, but work in other labs as well, double inhales followed by an extended exhale are the fastest way that I'm aware of to bring the mind and the body into a more relaxed state.
Really?
Yeah.
The fastest way. So if I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, just do a 3 or 2?
2 inhales through the nose, and then exhale slow through the mouth. 1 to 3 of those repeated will bring your level of autonomic arousal down basically to baseline.
What's the autonomic?
It's called
autonomic arousal?
Sorry.
What was it?
Sorry. So the autonomic nervous system, it just means automatic. Yeah, it just means automatic. And it's a misnomer because as I'm describing, it's not all automatic. I'm sorry. So autonomic arousal is kind of your level of alertness or your level of calm. People sometimes call it sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic. I avoid sympathetic, parasympathetic, because sympathetic sounds like sympathy, and then people think it means calm and nice, when it actually means stress and freaking
Sympathetic
out.
is stress.
Exactly. The naming...
Parasympathetic is non-stress.
That's right. And those names have to do with the anatomy and the locations of the neurons involved in them.
Sure.
But I think for anyone that experiences anxiety from time to time, which is everybody, knowing that you can consciously take control over these neurons that control the ratio of carbon dioxide and oxygen in your lungs, et cetera. Even if you don't remember any of that, it's just 2 inhales through the nose. What you're trying to do is maximally inflate those little sacs in your lungs and then exhale long through the mouth because you're blowing off carbon dioxide.
I heard you do does it matter the cadence? Because you did a long deep breath and then a shorter.
Not so much.
That's just your style.
Yeah, you're just trying to fill those as big as you can. So the advice that we hear of take a deep breath or just exhale is sort of right, but it doesn't capture this neural circuit. So a lot of what my lab is focused on, because there's so many great labs and people doing great stuff in the breathwork community, Patrick McEwen, Brian McKenzie, there are all these incredible people doing this work, Wim Hof.
Yeah.
But my lab's been mainly focused on what is the neural machinery that controls these brain-body states. And the reason these physiological size work is partially because you offload carbon dioxide, you reinflate the lungs, so when the body has oxygen, it's happy. When it doesn't have oxygen, it gets stressed. But the other reason is the most direct and fastest connection between the brain and body for controlling your state of mind is what's called the phrenic nerve, P-H-R-E-N-I-C. The phrenic nerve connects these neurons that I'm referring to in these 2 brain centers that control breathing with the diaphragm. A lot of people get excited about the vagus nerve, and I'm not out to punish the vagus nerve or the veganistas, but the truth is the vagus nerve is a very slow system for calming the brain and body. It's called the rest and digest pathway. People are engaging their vagus all the time when they eat a big meal. When the stomach is distended, it sends a signal to the brain that, oh, I have enough food, it's time to rest and digest. But eating, first of all, if you're only using food as a way to control your stress,
that's not a good habit.
It's not a good habit.
and you'll be depressed one day.
That's right. People have learned long ago, thousands of years ago, that the best way to suppress a cortisol response is with carbohydrates because it blunts cortisol. But this is why people eat carbohydrate-rich foods when they're stressed.
And when cortisol is spiked, what happens?
So every morning when you wake up, there's a cortisol spike. That's a good cortisol spike. That's a stress
spike, right?
It's a good one. It's the one that wakes you up out of sleep, and you want that early in the day.
So you're not just like groggy all day, right?
That's right.
Okay,
cortisol has important positive health-promoting functions. There's a signature of depression and anxiety, however, that the psychiatrists know about, which is a 9 p.m. cortisol spike. For people who are depressed, there's a second spike of cortisol late in the day. And that's problematic and is associated with a lot of mental health issues.
And cortisol is a stress hormone, is that right?
Cortisol is a stress hormone. So you have your adrenal glands, which are right above your kidneys and your lower back, and there are two parts to it. They release adrenaline, which is also called epinephrine. And adrenaline is what makes you feel agitated. If you're calm, you're walking along, you look at your phone and there's a troubling text message, you immediately have focus, energy, and alertness.
Is the brain connected to those then, and it sends a signal to each other?
That's right.
Really?
That's right.
And then it affects the body.
That's right.
And then the body feels it.
That's right. So adrenaline is liberated into the body very fast, in less than a second, 500 milliseconds.
You see something, you're reacting to it, and it's just boom.
That's right. And it recruits a set of neurons that live right in the core of your body. They then send a signal out to your body, and all of a sudden, you feel like you want to move. And the stress is just, it's going to dilate your pupils, cue your alertness, and make you agitated and want to move.
The body's pretty fascinating.
It's really fascinating. And you want this because, the other night I was taking a hike. I was out here a couple days ago and taking a hike in Topanga. And I saw a shadow. I looked down and it didn't move. It was a snake. It wasn't a rattlesnake, but
still,
all that happened in less than a second, right? And these are primitive pathways designed to get you to your alertness. My night vision is so-so, but all of a sudden I felt like I could see clearly, and that's adrenaline. Cortisol is a bit more slow acting. So when that adrenaline is up over and over and over again for days and days, cortisol starts getting liberated also from the adrenals. It comes from other places too, but mainly from the adrenals. And the cortisol system is an anti-inflammation system as well as an inflammation system. But
it's both.
It's both. But people, they give cortisone shots to football players, in the locker room for a reason. It blocks pain and all these things. So
but too much of it over an extended period of time does what?
It can cause chronic inflammation. It can cause chronic fatigue. I mean, there is a debate out there. Most serious MDs don't believe in adrenal burnout. People think of adrenal burnout. There is something
adrenal fatigue or adrenal burnout.
So there is something called adrenal insufficiency syndrome, which is a real medical phenomenon where the adrenals are incapable of making these cortisol and adrenal hormones. But the truth is that you have enough adrenaline and cortisol in your body to last 2 lifetimes and 25 famines. I mean, we were built with a lot of robustness, right? This explains, the David Goggins of the world. We all do have that greater capacity that people talk about. The stress is very misunderstood because people think of stress as this ancient carryover that's very unfortunate. It kind of gets lumped with depression, like, oh, this is just a flaw in our design or something. But actually, stress is wonderful. It actually activates our immune system. So anytime you liberate adrenaline into your bloodstream, you also protect yourself against infection of bacteria and viruses. Because if you think about it, if we had to gather food and we didn't have it, and we had to then pack up and migrate long distances, you can't afford to get sick. And this is why people who work, and then rest, they usually get sick when they finally stop and rest.
Really?
Yeah, it's like the post-finals phenomenon in university or after the season for a game, or the caretakers thing where you're taking care of somebody who's ill and you're just work, or taking care of young children, and then you finally stop to rest, you go on vacation and you get slammed with an illness.
Why is that? Because you're being in your comfort zone now? Or
because stress turned off. And adrenaline, so that the stress response recruits the immune organs of the body to release killer T cells. In fact, Wim Hof breathing, I know you're familiar with Wim, of doing 20 or 30 deep inhales and exhales, and also combined with some breath hold type work, exhale, hold, inhale, hold, is known to stimulate adrenaline release. And one of the better papers that's out there, scientific peer-reviewed papers, is a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences where they brought in 2 groups. One group did Wim Hof breathing. The other group did just mindful meditation. Both groups were injected with E. coli.
This is crazy.
Right?
It's crazy.
Right? It's crazy. The meditators got fever, diarrhea, and vomiting. And the people who did Wim Hof either didn't get it or got it to a much lesser extent.
They felt sluggish, but
That's
not.
Right. They didn't. Right.
Isn't that
this
crazy?
is not an experiment to do at home.
Isn't this crazy?
But it makes perfect sense because that breathing simulates a stress response. It stimulates cortisol and adrenaline, which
protects the body.
Right. Which signals to the thymus, the spleen, and the other, the nodes of the immune system to liberate killer cells. And so when that bacteria comes in, the system is ready for it.
Your body is defending against viruses and disease,
That's right.
essentially. When you create a routine of healthy stress.
That's right. And we could talk about, we definitely want to, you don't want stress on all the time. Sleep is really important, et cetera. But that stress response combats infection because it recruits immune cells. Now, I want to be really clear because there's been a lot of discussion about that study out there, most of which is totally wrong. And
the Wim Hof breathing study?
The study was done correctly, but when people recap that study and summarize it, oftentimes they'll say it suppressed the immune response, that people were able to suppress the immune response, and that's absolutely wrong.
What does that mean, suppress the immune response?
Well, exactly. It doesn't make any sense. What that did was, and if you look at the graphs in that paper, which I've done, what it did is it stimulated cortisol release. It stimulated adrenaline release or epinephrine release so that the system was primed to battle infection. Wow. And so I think it's a very impressive thing. And hats off to Wim for discovering and thinking about a way to recruit what's called the innate immune system. Before that study, it was thought that you couldn't really recruit the immune system in that way. Now, you don't have to do that breathing. You could if you like, but you don't have to do that breathing to recruit the immune response.
What else could you do?
A cold shower or an ice bath is another way to induce stress.
Which is what he does too.
Exactly. And so I think that, when you look at states of stress, cold water is one way to do it. The breathing that they do, that sort of Wim Hof breathing, is also classically called tumo breathing. It's kind of the opposite of the physiological sigh that I described, the double inhale exhale, because it's not designed to reduce stress. It's actually designed to increase your level of alertness. And it's interesting because a lot of people find great relief from stress by doing this tumo type Wim Hof intense breathing once a day. Now, the reason I suggest physiological sighs is they can be done in real time. You can get into the elevator and do a physiological sigh. You could also do tumo type breathing.
In any moment you can do a...
Right, exactly. Whereas the more intense forms of breathing are more of a practice that you do.
Yeah, might take 10, 20 minutes.
Right. What they tend to do, and what cold showers and ice baths and things like that do, is they raise the ceiling on your stress threshold. And what I mean by that is throughout the day and throughout the year, we're confronted with different things. Right now, we're confronted with a lot of things. 2020 is the year of being confronted with stress of various kinds. The mind plays an important role in interpreting whether or not it's overwhelming or tolerable. So intense breathing like tumo breathing, or ice baths or cold showers, or intense exercise like high intensity interval training type stuff, teaches the mind to be comfortable in these higher stress states, where, in other words, it teaches people to be comfortable when they have a lot of adrenaline in their body. This is basically stress inoculation. But stress inoculation is not about not getting stressed. It's actually about divorcing the mind-body relationship a bit so that you're calm in the mind when your body is very amplified. Yeah, so if you've ever done tumo-type breathing or you've done a cold shower, the goal is to get the adrenaline release.
And then calm your mind. And stay in the ice, not like, I'm exhausted, I'm freezing, but more like, no, I can handle this.
That's right.
And have power over your thoughts and your mind, so that you can have more control of your body. Obviously, you're going to feel cold.
Right.
But if you can, does the mind have 100% power over what the body feels?
No. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a significant control over it.
Say I feel cold in ice, right? I'm in ice, it's 30 degrees.
Right.
Can I control my mind to say, you know what, this is actually a hot tub, and you feel warm, and you're feeling hot right now? Or is it too much physiological barriers to break through that?
To some extent you can. So I think the question that you're asking is a very important one. It's actually the question, which is, to what extent does our subjective narrative,
the story we tell ourselves,
actually mean something for the body? And to what extent does the body actually mean something for the subjective narrative? So this gets into some areas of work that we're doing now, and so I do want to highlight that it's ongoing work. But I think, the old narrative, meaning 10 years ago, was that if you're feeling depressed, just smile. Well, if that worked, we would have a lot less depression than we see out there.
Right.
Now, that does not mean...
Most people actually who are depressed just aren't smiling as well. Like, when you change your physiology, doesn't it also start to change the way you think about yourself a little bit?
The reason I call it a brain-body contract early on is that the brain and the body are constantly in dialogue. So, the idea that when we're depressed, we tend to be in more defensive type postures. When we're feeling good, we tend to be in more like relaxed and extended postures. All true. But it does not mean that just by occupying the extended posture that I'm going to completely shift the mind.
Right.
That's a first step. Think about like two interlocking gears. It's one gear that turns the other, but then they need to kind of dance together before you can get the whole system going.
So how do you get it to dance together?
Exactly. So there is one way in which subjective thought and deliberate thought is very powerful over states of mind and body. To answer your question, can you think your way out of the ice bath being cold? So a couple things that are important. First of all, just to go a little deeper on what thoughts are. Thoughts happen spontaneously all the time. Mm-hmm. They're popping up like a poorly filtered internet connection. But thoughts can also be deliberately introduced. For instance, right now, I can say, okay, have a thought that just decide to write your name, and you can do that. I'm going to decide to write my name, and you can do it. So that's a deliberate thought, which says that you can introduce thoughts. So I think it's very hard to control negative thoughts directly by trying to suppress them. Generally, they tend to just want to continue to geyser up all the time. But we can introduce a positive thought.
Can you think of two thoughts at the same time?
Probably not.
So you can only have one thought at a time.
Right, but they come very fast.
But it comes and goes. So you have to constantly be intentional and deliberate about what you think. Right. Otherwise, and a spontaneous thought will pop back in.
That's right.
Based on your experience, based on sensory, based on how you're feeling or perceiving something, your environment, it's just going to keep popping in.
Right.
So how do we deliberately have a positive thought more often?
Right. So I'm a big fan of wellness, and I think it's a great community, but it tends to run in absolutes, and there aren't a lot of operational definitions, as we say in science. And what I love about your questions, you're asking for really getting to the meat of things, asking for the operational definitions. One of the most dangerous ideas in wellness and in popular psychology is that your body hears every thought you have. What a terrible thing to put on people. What a challenging thing. I don't think people should try and suppress their negative thoughts. I think there is great value, however, to introducing positive thought schemes. Now, the reason is not because I think it's just because I think so, but because there's actually a neurochemical basis for controlling stress and actually making stress more tolerable and extending one's ability to be in bouts of effort. And that relates to the dopamine pathway. So the molecule dopamine is a reward. It's released in the brain when you win a game, you close a deal, you meet the love of your life, someone likes your photo, the great love of your life, you complete something. But most of our dopamine release is not from achieving goals. It's actually released when we are en route to our goals, when we're in pursuit of our goals, and we think we're on the right path.
This is why a lot of people get depressed after they achieve a big goal, because they feel like, I'm supposed to feel something greater. I felt this thing for 2 minutes, and now that's it?
That's right. High achievers know to attach dopamine to the effort process.
To the pursuit, the day-to-day tasks, the growth, the lessons, the losses, like everything, right?
Well, and it can be to some wins along the way.
Yeah.
But growth mindset, which is the academic discovery and laboratory discovery of my colleague Carol Dweck at Stanford, is the hallmark of growth mindset is really two things. One is, I'm not where I want to be now, but I'm capable of getting there eventually. The other is to attach a sense of reward to the effort process itself. In fact,
don't reward the result, reward the effort.
That's right. And if you look at true high performers, people that are consistently good at what they do, they don't peak and go through the postpartum depression and crash and come back, and their life is a cycle of ups and downs, but really people who are on that upward trajectory consistently, those people attach dopamine to the effort process. And actually, one of her original studies on the discovery of growth mindset was these kids that loved doing math problems that they knew they couldn't get right. So it's like the people love puzzles, but in this case, they knew they couldn't get it right, but they loved doing it. And incidentally or not so incidentally, these kids are fantastic at math when there is a right answer, because they feel some sense of reward from the effort process.
Yeah.
Now, the cool thing about dopamine is that it's very subjectively controlled. We can all learn to secrete dopamine in our brain in response to things that are in a purely subjective way.
Our interpretation.
Our interpretation. But it has to be attached to reality. So, one should never confuse
what is real.
Right. So if you're thinking about the effort you're expending. So let's say somebody right now is financially back on their heels and they're setting up a new business, for instance. And it's hard. If they can take a few moments or minutes each day to reflect on the fact that the effort process is allowing them to climb out of their hole potentially, that it's giving them an opportunity, that it's somehow they are on the right path, or if they're not in movement along that path, or at least oriented on the right path, they're not lying in bed all day.
They're taking a step forward.
They're taking a step. If they can reward that process internally, two things happen. First of all, the brain circuits that are associated with building subjective rewards and dopamine get stronger, so you get better at that process. And second, and most importantly, dopamine has an amazing ability to buffer adrenaline and buffer epinephrine. And what I mean by that is there was a study that was published in the journal Cell, excellent journal, Cell Press Journal, a couple years ago, showing that with repeated bouts of effort, we use and we release more and more epinephrine. It's kind of adrenaline, but in the brain.
With more effort, we're
every time you put in effort. So every time you make, for this, let's keep it, if I were to keep it in the business context, every time you write that email, every time you, let's see, it's a person who's a craftsman or a craftswoman, every time you're working in the shop and doing that, every bit of effort, you're taking a little bit of money out of this epinephrine account. You're spending epinephrine. At some point, those levels of epinephrine get high enough that you feel like quitting. It feels exhausting. And this was done in a beautiful study, actually, where they control the visual environments and they have the subjects exert effort. And they can control the visual environment, so sometimes the effort of taking steps and moving forward, this is actually kind of pushing forward in kind of swimming motion, would give them the sensation that they were actually making progress. And other times it was an exercise in futility where they would just keep the visual world stationary and they would expend effort and they didn't think they were going anywhere.
My gosh.
Epinephrine's climbing, and eventually they quit. Now dopamine is able to push back on that epinephrine and give you, anyone, the feeling that you could continue. And maybe even the feeling that you want to continue. And you've seen this actually, football is a good example. Two teams play, say the Super Bowl. Both teams are max effort the entire time.
Yeah.
Max effort. The team that wins, suddenly, in a moment, has the energy to jump all over the place, party for days. They can talk, I mean, they have
exhausted
energy.
right before
That's right.
then.
Well, that wasn't glycogen or stored energy of any kind, except it was neural energy. And what happened was, effort is this adrenaline. Eventually, people quit. They just quit. The dopamine is able to suppress that. And so then you're expending effort, but you're doing it from a place of feeling like you have energy for it.
So we need dopamine to keep the effort going. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's right. Dopamine is not just about reward. It's one of the biggest misconceptions. Dopamine is about motivation and drive. It's like a jet that propels you along a path.
So how do we get more dopamine?
You practice subjectively releasing dopamine in your mind.
Like how?
Okay, so that's a great question. First of all, there are ways you can get more dopamine release through thoughts or through drugs or through supplements. I want to be really clear. There is a drug, there are two drugs actually, that will cause massive release of dopamine. They're called cocaine and methamphetamine. The problem
That's what gets us addicted because it feels so good.
The problem is, cocaine and methamphetamine stimulate so much dopamine release that the drug becomes the only source. It becomes the goal and the path. It becomes the path and the destination. And you look at people's lives when they do a lot of cocaine and methamphetamine, and that baseline on their life goes down very,
because there's
very
no
fast.
reason to work hard at anything else because you feel good.
That's right.
And that's the greatest feeling you'll have, so why do anything else when you can have that feeling?
That's right. And if you think about, remember these neurochemical systems, adrenaline, cortisol, dopamine, epinephrine, they weren't designed to keep us safe from tigers and to hunt and gather or to build Fortune 500 companies. They were designed to do anything. They were designed to be generic so that depending on our circumstances, we could adapt. So in an animal context, an animal that, let's say, is hunting or it needs food for its young, it's going to feel agitation. That's stress. That's cortisol. It's like hunger. My babies might not eat. I might not eat. maybe it's looking for a mate, it's going to feel agitation and start looking and roaming and searching. Foraging is it's called in the animal behavior world. It's foraging. At some point, it might catch a smell of something, a potential mate, or berries, or a stream if it's thirsty. At that moment, dopamine is released, and now it has energy to continue along that path. Whereas there's a specific pathway in the brain that's involved in depression and disappointment, that if it goes to that place and it turns out it was the wrong path, there's a signal that actually suppresses dopamine so that you don't repeat that mistake again.
So you don't give up.
That's right.
You just don't repeat it again.
That's right. And those events that...
So it reminds you, like, that's not the path to go down.
That's right.
Interesting.
And we're sort of veering towards neuroplasticity here, which is the brain's ability to change itself in response to experience. Dopamine is one of the strongest triggers of neuroplasticity because it says those actions led to success previously. You're going to repeat those.
Go do those.
Those actions led to failure previously, and don't repeat those.
So dopamine triggers us to stay on the right path.
That's right. So you asked, how do you do this? So to really make it concrete.
And is there such thing as too much dopamine?
Well,
if you're not on drugs?
So cocaine and amphetamine are bad because they lower the baseline on life. They make people very focused on things outside of themselves. That's the other thing that dopamine does. It can be positive or negative. But when we have dopamine in our system, we tend to be outward facing and in pursuit of things in our environment. You can look at somebody on cocaine and realize that that's the extreme version of that. But I love social media for the reason that you see the molecules in the memes. So it's like, get after it, what do sharks do on Monday, or I can't remember the specific things. Or then they're sometimes it's just time to chill. Well, that's a different molecule. That's serotonin, right? And then dopamine is the get after it molecule. And epinephrine is effort. So if we were going to break this down really concrete, we'd say adrenaline and epinephrine are about effort. Just effort, with no subjective label on them, good or bad. Effort, whether or not it's stress or you're pursuing something you want to do, it's exerting effort. Dopamine is about reward, but more so about motivation and pursuit of rewards. And then we'll get to it in a little bit, but serotonin is a different source of reward, but it comes from more relaxed states, and it resets the whole system, and it's associated with things like sleep and gratitude and meditation, and especially gratitude. And then I guess to round this out, the cortisol system is more of a longer term stress.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've all heard the sayings, how do you, journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Or how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Or, there are all these sayings, and it goes back to the Bible and earlier, right? I mean, this is not new, these are not new sayings, but they're showing up in different forms. What's lost in those short descriptions, however, is that every step is not equivalent. If it were just that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, everyone would pursue their goals. Everyone would push back against adversity. You can read the inspirational stories as many times as one needs, and I do think inspirational stories are of very high value. In fact, I think they're vicarious dopamine. I think they give us the sense that we could, which then orients us to the world again.
So maybe it's possible for me.
That's right. So let's say, let's take the example of somebody who's...
but just to finish that story of, it's not about just taking a single step and one step at a time. Is it because there's adversities every 10 steps you go, and so it's harder and harder? So it's not just
it's just very nonlinear. It's some days go, I know this from my scientific career, it's, some days it's easy, some days it's hard, it's all over the place, right? So I think the thing to remember is that dopamine is this incredibly powerful molecule that allows us to buffer the effort process. It allows us to be in effort longer, and it allows us to actually eventually enjoy the process of effort.
And not think about the reward, but just say, I'm enjoying the process.
Right. Well, you just described the first step. The first step in learning to attach dopamine to the effort process, which is the key operation in order to succeed, is to be very careful about how much you focus on the end goal. Keeping the goal in mind is important for a proper orientation. You have to know the ultimate destination. But if at any point we were to evaluate our progress relative to that end goal, or if we don't know what the end goal is, there's a huge gap there, and it can feel overwhelming.
And depressing, and I'm not good enough,
That's right.
I should just give up, what am I doing this for?
That's right.
And those thoughts will affect us.
And they're very realistic, right? I
Yeah.
mean, as Carol will say, and other people have said in the psychology field, positive self-talk, oftentimes, unless you do it correctly, you're badly wrong. Lying to yourself won't work. Saying I'm a winner, I'm a winner, I'm a winner
When
when
you've
you
always
haven't
lost.
or you haven't won yet
Yeah.
is great, but that's not the most effective use of these systems.
Well, you're also being out of integrity with yourself. You're telling yourself a lie.
Right.
You're like, and then you're losing your ability to have confidence because you're just lying to yourself.
Right. And if it's really extreme, there's a name for it. It's called delusional, right? right? And people will start to point that out, and then it becomes harder to recruit people into your goals. So I think the key thing is to attach that sense of reward to the effort process. It's saying, look, I am oriented in the right direction and rewarding the things you're not doing. I'm not back on my heels. I'm not just staying, in bed in the morning. A good example of this came to me recently. I have a good friend. He did 9 years in the SEAL teams. His name is Pat Dossett, and we were talking about the Admiral McRaven thing. Get up and make your bed, and and they really do that. And I think the way it was described was, so that at the end of the day, even if everything doesn't go well, your bed is still made.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that's not that big of a reward, frankly.
Right.
So I said that, and I
love it though. I make my bed.
I definitely make my bed in the morning. But I mean, going back and seeing that at the end of a hard day.
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough. I felt like there was something else there. So I asked him, he said, well, it's very interesting because part of it is about not just making your bed, but it's the things you're not doing by making your bed. You're not lying in bed and ruminating. You're not back on your heels.
You're not on your phone.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when you look at, and you have spent a lot of time with people in high-performing communities, mainly through some consulting work, but what you find is that we can all either be back on our heels, flat-footed, or forward center of mass.
Forward, yeah.
And when you look at people who are in these high-performance communities, they try and keep their center of mass forward, almost through what seem like trivial things, like making your bed or making the cup of coffee. But it's not just
Brushing
about
your
what you're
teeth,
doing;
like, yeah.
it's all the things you're not doing
Interesting.
that can put you down the path of ruminating or put you down the path of unhealthy behavior. So the key to this is, if we want to be very concrete, we should probably focus on actions. And I'll use fitness as an example because it translates to everybody, whereas people's circumstances differ. Let's say somebody really wants to take on a fitness routine. They hate running, or they want to lose weight in a healthy way, this kind of thing. So we've all heard the example, well, you put your shoes by the door on day 1. Day 2, you put them on. Day 3, you go out the door. Day 4, you walk around the block, and then, and then eventually they're running marathons. Okay, great. But to sustain that behavior, or even to make the behavior pleasurable and to give you energy, the key is to subjectively reward those steps. So it's not going to be, let's say I go out and I run a mile, and my goal is to run 10 miles in a few weeks. The key is, as you're in the strain of that mile, the hard part, you want to tell yourself, this is the good part. This is the part that gives me energy. And I'll be very surprised if people don't actually feel like they could continue further. So it's a journey of 1,000 miles starts with is made up of single steps. But the key is to reward the harder steps, not the easier ones, and not the ones where you get the thing that you want.
Don't reward yourself for putting your shoes on and taking a step outside.
You could if that was a huge barrier for you.
If it's very hard.
If it was very hard for you.
But running the 10 miles is hard.
Right. Find the wall and push a little bit further through that wall and reward that process. So this is why I think reps in the gym, the final reps, like reps to failure, are usually not the best example. First of all, most people aren't doing reps to failure, and it doesn't translate to young kids and stuff where they probably shouldn't be doing heavy reps to failure, this kind of thing. What you want, however, is if you're going to go there, to think about this is the hard part, because that's when adrenaline, norepinephrine are getting maxed out, and that's when you have an opportunity to bring dopamine in and teach those neural pathways to slam that back down. And I don't want to highlight them too much because they are a very niche and specialized community, but you look at people in special operations, you look at the process, like the whole evaluation process of who gets in and who doesn't. It's really about putting people into stress and seeing who can not just make it through that stress, but buffer that stress. Reward the process through teamwork, reward the process of stress through some internal dialogue that has everything to do with not being back on your heels, not being flat-footed, but center of mass forward. And I should also be clear, I'm not talking about everybody being super aggro and always like,
work. Yeah.
In fact, if you're spending too much epinephrine, if you're too much of an adrenaline junkie, you will burn out
burn
eventually.
out.
Unless you can find ways to recover yourself or to buffer that with dopamine. And the recovery process is especially important. There's a second reward system. So you've got the dopamine system, and I guess to really put a box around it, the subjective reward needs to be done at the hardest portion of a process. The tough conversation with a significant other, it's like when it's really tough and that's when you want to start telling yourself, this is the good part because I'm not speaking, or this is the good part because
I'm not reacting.
Right, I'm not reacting, or this is the good part because I'm probably not doing it correctly, but I'm on the right path, right? They're upset, they're not feeling your empathy, this kind of thing, or you're not really understanding what's going on, you're getting frustrated. But if you tell yourself, this is the neural pathway getting ground in there, like really dialed in, so that the next time I'm going to breeze right past this. Yeah. That's really how the process works. Because remember, no one comes along and drips dopamine in your ear, even if you get $1 billion, or you win a Nobel Prize, or you win the presidency. It's all internal. These neurochemicals are all internal. And while some of them are designed to be released in response to things very reflexively, like food, sex, sleep, all these things will trigger these neurochemicals, we have this big forebrain which allows us to place subjective context on things.
How do you do it then? How do you bring dopamine in your brain subjectively through daily conversation with yourself?
So there's a process I'm going through right now where I'm trying to write a book, and it's hard. And I was told that the harder it is, the better I'm probably doing it. And I was like, great. And my editor's ready to kill me, and because I'm slow, and I know, and I'm a very slow person. I drive people crazy. I'm like glacially slow because science is slow, and I like to get things right.
You want to rush it. Yeah.
I like to get things right, but I'm very proud of the fact that everything we've published, I can stand behind. It was the best we could do with the tools at the time, and I just know that when I look back on a writing career or a scientific career, I want to be able to say, every journal we put it in was rock solid. Everything was rock solid. Mm-hmm. We had fun doing it. The relationship. So I go slow.
Yeah.
But as a consequence, what I'm finding is there are a lot of interferences these days. I think social media is great. I teach neuroscience on social media because I think it's important to do public education.
But it's a distraction too.
But it's incredible. And it's incredible how much time and energy it can take. So what I've started doing now is I turn off my phone and I lock it in a safe. And I experience extreme anxiety.
Right?
It's so weird.
Why is that? Is it because it gives you so much dopamine that when you're not having it?
Well, this is scary because I actually think, brief anecdote, on the weekend I was driving, there's a kid that I mentor, and I picked up my phone and I was texting while I was driving. And he said to me, this is really embarrassing for me, he said, I wish you wouldn't text while you drive. And I put it down and I realized, this is crazy. I know that my life and his life is far more important, and the lives of the people around me are far more important than any text message, which means I wasn't doing it rationally. It's just pure reflex at this point. So I don't think I pick up the phone because I don't even know what I'm looking for there anymore. It's just become reflexive.
Wow.
So for me lately, the longer I can keep that phone in a safe and write on a grant or this book, what I tell myself is the agitation is good. At least I'm not doing that. And then I find that as I start to write and I get into the process, I start feeling good about it, and I'll pause and say, okay, I have control. I have ultimate control over my behavior. I can put that thing away. There might be a nuclear war out there, and I'm just doing this anyway. I have control over my thoughts, my feelings, and behavior. So I tell myself that, and then I find I have immense energy, and all I want to do is write. And I kind of tunnel into the process.
Wow.
And I think that sometimes people need to write these things out for themselves so it's really concrete. I think some people are so unskilled at subjective rewards that writing it out is really powerful.
So what would you write out for yourself as a subjective reward for this experience?
As long as I'm writing, I'm on the right path. As long as I'm not writing, I'm looking at my phone, I'm not on the right path. Because for me, the 2 or 3 things that are most important for my career are writing grants, working on this book manuscript, and writing scientific manuscripts. I mean, there are other things as well.
And anything else that you're not doing is holding you back from doing that.
That's right.
So you need to be focused, center mass forward on doing those things.
That's right. So I don't do any jumping around, power poses, things like that. I will use tools to kind of ramp up my dopamine. There are certain songs that are really embedded in my emotional thing that go back to, when I was a, wild, skateboarding punk rock teenager that will get me fired up. And I think there's real utility. That's pure dopamine. That's just a
for
dopamine.
moments, but it's not sustainable. You have to subjectively keep yourself motivated, I guess. Right?
That's right. And then if I finish a chapter, I will stop for a moment and I'll just kind of smile and laugh at myself. I'm big on like self-reflection with humor and just think, this is crazy. You know, my brain is under my control. There would be people out there that say there's no free will, but I do not believe that. I put my hands in a lot of brains. You stimulate certain brain areas, people do things. You stimulate other brain areas, people think things. Ultimately, unless you have electrodes in your head and someone's stimulating them, we are in control of our thoughts and behaviors. Wow. We can't control all of them, but my goal is to be as deliberate and non-reflexive as possible in life. That's my goal from when I wake up in the morning until I go to sleep.
How do we get to that place?
Little by little and by rewarding each thing. If you get up and I'll use the make the bed example, make the bed, you're not back on your heels, you make a cup of coffee, you sit down, you script out something in a journal, you exercise, maybe you call a relative that you think might need to hear from you or that you'd like to talk to. You do something in a deliberate way, just being deliberate and learning to push away the things that are trying to make you reflexive is so important.
Reflexive, same thing as reactive, or what's reflective?
Yeah, so there are two modes of brain operations. So now this is getting a little nitty gritty, but one is deliberate, where we're thinking duration, path, and outcome. What should I do? How long should I do it, and what's the outcome?
Deliberate.
Yeah.
Intentional.
And it feels like work. This is what people need to understand. That deliberate thought, deliberate action, writing the book, doing the workout you don't want to do, whatever it is, having the conversation, it's supposed to feel hard.
It's hard.
It's supposed to feel hard. But you should subjectively reward it so that you get better at doing that. So it's supposed to feel hard because it's associated with this release of these neurochemicals that create this agitation. The mental strain you feel when you're learning something is the trigger for neuroplasticity, for your brain to change.
Say that again, the mental strain you feel while doing something is the what?
Is the trigger for neuroplasticity.
Which neuroplasticity allows you to expand your mind to do more things.
That's right. So neuroplasticity is a process of taking something where there's duration, path, and outcome, where I'm working hard, I'm thinking hard, maybe it's a hard conversation, maybe it's a business plan, maybe it's a scientific career. And the goal of neuroplasticity is to make things reflexive so you don't have to think about them, right?
For instance, I just started taking Spanish class one-on-one, and it's extremely hard. It makes me want to say, why am I doing this?
Right.
This is going to take me years until I'm conversational. Who knows how long until I'm fluent? If it's this hard as like this stage, man, is it ever going to get easier? I have those moments every time I'm doing class. I'm like, this sucks.
Right.
Because I'm like, I'm 37. Can I learn this language at this point? It's so much easier when you're 5.
Yep.
Now it's almost impossible. I watched your video on this a couple of days ago on social media. And the video you talked about this is, yes, it's harder when you're older to expand your neuroplasticity, but what I'm hearing you say is like, it's the only way to live, is the older you get, you need to constantly be expanding it. Otherwise, you'll be going backwards.
That's right. So, when you want to learn something new like Spanish or a new physical skill, your mind shifts over, the forebrain comes on and says, okay, we're going to pay attention to things. And now what am I doing? And
I get so tired.
We start doing evaluative stuff to other people, to ourselves. And you can start using all sorts of examples like, wait, I was a professional athlete in your case, or I want to be clear, I was never a professional athlete, but you were a professional athlete. You've been successful in other regimes of life, but it still feels like effort, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that effort is because two things are happening. One is adrenaline, epinephrine is being released. So it doesn't feel great.
It's not fun.
It's like, And then, and in addition to that, by bringing focus to something, you're recruiting a neuromodulator called acetylcholine, which is the molecule of focus. Now, it's important.
Which takes energy and effort.
It takes energy and effort. You feel it in your body and in your brain. And it tends to acetylcholine will highlight the areas of your brain that are active during that learning phase when the teacher's talking or you're talking and making that effort. It's paying attention to how you're moving your mouth, what it sounds like to you, feedback cues. And it's marking those brain areas for change. And then later, when you sleep or when you work out or when you're having a conversation with somebody, that's actually when the brain changes occur.
So not during the actual activity.
That's right.
It's when you're not doing the activity, resting or recovering, when it starts to expand or
That's
when it
right.
starts to
It's
grow.
So neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change in response to experience, and is the main way in which we go from deliberate action, duration, path, outcome stuff, to reflexive action and thought. That process has two parts. One is the trigger, which is in adults is triggered by focus and attention and even a heightened state of agitation. The more frustrated you feel, the more you're actually triggering learning. It's saying this is important, this is important. Because the brain just wants to do whatever it wants to do. It needs to cue itself to, oh, this must need to change. And then the second part is deep relaxation, meditation, in particular a form of meditation called yoga nidra, which we could talk about, but forms of deep relaxation, deep sleep like slow wave sleep. That's when the connections between neurons, called synapses, actually get stronger. That's when the connections that you don't want get removed. And that's also in certain cases where you get new neurons actually born in your brain to help these circuits speak Spanish.
This is why in sports growing up, I remember I would go to like basketball camps in the summer and I would always learn new footwork. And I always just wanted to be like the fancy guy doing like whatever, finger roll layups or something as a kid. But then we would go to these basketball camps and we'd just work on the fundamentals and the footwork and like all this different stuff. And I remember being in the moment, it being very frustrating and challenging. I was like, I don't get this. And I would suck at it. But then the next day I would come back and I would all of a sudden like have it after a few times of doing it. But I never learned how to do it in the moment. It was always like, okay, I might have got it once, but then I fumbled on it. It was the next day or the next few days where it's like, oh, I can do this.
It just shows up.
It shows up.
It just shows up.
And that's because when the mind is able to relax, it's then making the connections on how to do that thing.
Yeah, so in deep sleep and rest is when the connections actually get built up. It's sort of like with resistance training, right? The gym is a little misleading, resistance training, because people get the famous pump, and so they get a visual glimpse into what they might look like later. But then, of course, it goes back down, right? But actual hypertrophy, the enlargement of the muscle fibers and the strengthening of the neural connections to those fibers is later when you sleep. So it's the same thing with neuroplasticity.
Yeah. How important is it for us to constantly be learning and challenging our mind the older we get?
Well, I believe it's very important for living a full life. And my hero in this, two heroes actually, is I would say Richard Feynman, the great physicist, who had a very playful attitude about learning. That's one thing that I really should illustrate. If you are in frustration and strain,
just have fun.
A sense of play is great, because in play you have focus, you have intention and alertness, and it keeps you light enough that there's that dopamine release. Dopamine is released in play for a reason, because kids and animals, young animals and young children, learn social interactions through play.
Yeah.
A puppy bites another puppy, and the puppy barks out loud. That's why they have those sharp puppy teeth, to say that's too much of a bite. Then they play a little bit more. They're finding the boundaries. They're finding the limits to which they can use physical force for hurting another or just for playing. They learn soft bite. Play in animals is an ancient form of sampling these neural pathways. And as adults, we tend to be more demanding of ourselves. We don't tend to embrace as much play. Richard Feynman is somebody who really incorporated a lot of play into his adult life. He learned how to, in addition to being a Nobel Prize winning physicist, he also played bongo drums. He learned how to sketch and paint late in his life. He did float tanks. He was kind of a wild man, but he had a lot of fun, and he was a lifetime learner. So I think it's important because it's a great way to learn dopamine release, and it's a great way to expand one's experience of life.
This is when I was in Poland with Wim Hof earlier this year. I took a group of like 13 guys, and we were all nervous to get into this ice tub together for 10 minutes, like up to here. And for the first 2 minutes, it was not fun. We were just like, this sucks, this is cold. But then all of a sudden we were like, let's have fun. We're gonna be in here for 8 more minutes. We might as well try to enjoy it. So we started chanting, we started singing, we started just in a rhythm together, like smiling, and it was like, it's more enjoyable. It's still gonna be challenging, but you might as well try to have the most fun in the challenge than just suffer, right?
Yeah, team and community, not by coincidence, is a powerful tool for buffering stress. Again, look at high-performing teams like SEAL teams or other special operations units. The team is a big part of it for being functional in the actual job.
It'd almost be impossible to do it alone if you're a Navy SEAL, right?
Yeah, there are other divisions of special operations where actually it's more focused on solo missions.
That's hard.
Yeah, and so there are people that are very good at that, but teamwork is a great way to buffer the stress response.
Yeah.
And so earlier you asked, is there any way to make it not cold? I guess the answer is no, but there is a way to make the cold not painful.
Right.
And so that's where dopamine intervenes. The other thing that's important, because we talked about neuroplasticity, you trigger it with focus and energy, and effort and strain, is, children can learn very easily. Their brain is hyperplastic, and very quickly the whole job of the young brain is to take things that it's taught and very quickly pass it over to reflex, including morals and beliefs.
To automatic.
And this is what's scary, is also, the things that kids hear and they believe and they're exposed to, those beliefs become reflexive. Now, around age 25 or so, the brain is still plastic and forever, for the entire life, but then you need more focus, and you need what's called self-directed plasticity, neuroplasticity. Self-directed meaning the only person that can change their brain for the better after about age 25 is the actual person.